evolution. A lot of people may not know a lot about this topic about evolution. Some people know a lot, some people don't. We're going to talk about it. We have a good friend of mine from church, Mr. Tom Carpenter, that's going to help us answer these questions concerning answering evolution. So if you're watching this recording on YouTube, we ask that you watch to the very end, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you at the next one. So we're going to go ahead and get started on answering evolution. Just a little bit about evolution before we get started with Tom. So, the Big Bang Theory and evolution. The Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory describes how the universe expands from a state of high density and temperature. And evolution, right? In Darwin's theory, species are changing over time. New species come from pre-existing species, and all species share a common ancestor. So that's just a small tidbit of the Big Bang Theory and evolution. What does the Bible say? God created all that now existed in 6 days and from nothing, and it was all perfect. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit act together in the work of creation. Only man was created in God's image. Out of all living things, God granted him dominion over all lesser life forms and the earth itself. That's what the Bible teaches about creation. Now for our guest, Mr. Tom Carpenter. So just a little bit personal about Tom Carpenter. He's been a defender of creation for 26 years. His top defending topics is philosophy of science and creation. And his website is creationdefense.com. It's a great honor to present to you a good friend of mine from church. We always talking about apologetics, and we're always talking about just whatever biblical. Mr. Tom Carpenter. Tom, you there? Tom, you might be mute.
Yeah, I did. I muted it. I don't know how that happened because you and I were just talking. But hey, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself and more about defending creation.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you both and Tony too for your work at Red Team Apologetics. It's not easy. I've been doing apologetics for like it says there, 26 years, and there are a lot of challenges. And you guys don't mess around with easy topics either. The Trinity, James, that's pretty good. So the creation. So what happened? Gabe and I go to the same church, and Tony was there a while. But back in 1990s, I started. I had the Sunday school class there, and I started a study on evolution and creation, and so that's where it all began. And as I began to look at it, I was a pharmacist for 35 years. I retired about 4 years ago. I'm doing this full time now, but the only ideas I had about evolution were based on my science. And so as I began to look at it, I guess the science was the first thing that made me just really reconsider what I had always thought. But teaching a Sunday school class, I had to do a deep dive into the hermeneutics, and because of those two aspects, I began to realize how important the creation doctrine is, and how spurious the evolution idea is. So I was in a really good church when I became a new Christian, And the discipleship class there, I you know, I ended up teaching that class a lot. But the reason I mention that is that during that class, we would read we would read a text. And one of my fondest memories, it's a class I had where I had all these people sitting around, and just I had a guy there with a PhD, worked at the CDC. I had another guy in there with a 7th grade education. And so it was just a fantastic group of people. And so, you know, I read a verse, a paragraph out of Romans. And I said, okay, let's go around the room. Let's find out what this means to everybody. And you know, people would tell me, and what happened was that people would say something, and it wasn't at all what the text was saying. I mean, most of the time it was biblical. But I think that is something that is important with this topic, because we need to make sure that we're reading the text for what it says. We're allowing the text to interpret itself. And you know, when we're absolutely sure we know what the text is saying, then we can go someplace else in the Bible, and then we can turn to other sources. But it should be the text of Scripture that determines our ideas here to begin with. You know, because we all come to Scripture with baggage, and so our challenge as we interpret the Bible is to get rid of that baggage. There's a great book. It's called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. I highly recommend the first part of that book. Is very, very good. I use that. Been using that for 30 years now. But that's our challenge. It's you know, we need to, when we read the Scripture, we need to wrestle our autonomy to the mat. We need to say, well, what is God saying in this text? And that should be our challenge, because we're in a culture now where we have more baggage than we've ever had before when we approach a text in Scripture. And so we need to really be careful that what we're teaching is what the text says, and not what we want it to say, or what application we want to draw from it. Scientifically, there's a quote that I read from John Morris that I've used a lot. It's called, it is, evolution is assumed, not proved. Creation is denied, not refuted. And that's basically the core. I think that's a fantastic quote. Another quote that I've used often over the years, I wrote an article on this called, you know, Evolution Survives on Censorship, Not Science. And so when we evaluate what people say with evolution, we have to understand that that's the context in which evolution is presented. There's another thing that is important in this debate. This is really a debate between science. I don't know if it's between science and Christianity. It's between science and the Christian worldview. It's a worldview issue. But actually, I'm kind of tired of that word worldview. I don't know about you guys, but it's being overused so much. I don't know if you agree with me on that. You know, it just seems, I found a word that's actually better. A philosopher named Donald James uses a word called conceptual schemes. So I've actually have a project over here I'm working on worldview. You know, this guy wrote 3 horrible articles on worldview stuff. And I'm not even going to use the word worldview. I'm going to use the word conceptual scheme, which philosophically is a more accurate and technical word. But anyway, so getting back to my whole evolution thing, I wrote a article for the newspaper here for 2.5 years in Rockdale County. And they had a religious section on, they let me write an article on evolution and creation. And then in the early 2000s, I spoke at many churches throughout the Southeast. And the big things I've done consistently over the years is I did a tour. I do hikes of Stone Mountain. I was just talking to Gabe. I'll probably do another one in April. That's the plan. And I also have given tours of Fernbank Natural History Museum from a Christian perspective. And so I did most of that in the early 2000s. Around the end, around 2006, 2010, I shifted my focus to the philosophy of science. Now, there's a lot of evidence, there are a lot of good ministries out there who address the evidences in creation versus evolution. And so I felt like this was an area of philosophy of science that was not being addressed well. So that's basically what I've been focusing on since then. I've had some papers published in research journals. I just had one published in the Netherlands. So it's so cool to see your articles in another language. But anyway, so I did that, and I was going to tell you about Stone Mountain at this point. Maybe I'll say that until later. But you know, there's a lot to say about Stone Mountain. For those of you who don't live in Atlanta, is a big granite mountain east of Atlanta, and so it's a real popular place. It's a tourist attraction. There's a hiking trail that goes up it. So that's what I do. I take other people up the mountain. I made friends with a geologist here in Georgia. His name is Carl Frody. He wrote a paper in 1994 about the geology at Stone Mountain and how it confirms the events of a worldwide flood, that it had to have, Stone Mountain had to have formed. There are three things. Number one, it had to have formed rapidly. Number two, there was water in its development, and its development was thousands, not years, millions of years ago. And the evidence at Stone Mountain, as I take people up the mountain, I show them that. So this is a field guide I wrote on it. So it's really out of date. My children probably wouldn't appreciate it because the pictures in the field guide are of them 20 years ago, so as children. But anyway, the point is that, so I've given hikes through, there's a lot of places in Georgia, Sequoia Caverns, Little River Little River Canyon, Cloudland Canyon, and DeSoto Falls. Those are some of the other places. So these are all things that I like to do because I think it's really helpful to bring people to these places and show them the evidence for for floods. So anyway, so I actually spoke at a public school once. Can you believe they let me do that? So anyway, the I've apologetics and the creation evolution issue is on the front lines of apologetics. There are major creation ministries, several major creation ministries out there that are focused on this issue, and it is important because it deals with a major doctrine in Christianity, and that's the doctrine of creation. But it also influences the doctrine of providence and the doctrine of aseity. Do you know what aseity means? James probably does, but it's the doctrine of God's self-evidence, God's self-existence. And then there's the other doctrine of the incomprehensibility of God. So I'm writing a paper right now. I'm trying to get an abstract approved for a paper on the incomprehensibility of God. So that's a basic overview of how I got to the point I am right now. So what I'm doing right now is I heard a quote from Albert Einstein that he said that if he was given a problem and given 1 hour to answer that problem, he would spend 59 minutes figuring out what the question is and 1 minute figuring out what the answer was. So that's what I've been doing. And for the last 4 years, I've been trying to figure out my conclusion is that the question really is in this debate. It's not about the age of the earth. It's not about dinosaurs or any of that stuff. The question really boils down to one word, and that word is lordship. Where do you begin your thinking? Does your thinking begin with the lordship in Jesus Christ, or does it begin with lordship in your own self, your own autonomy, your own self-rule? And if you break down these arguments that way, then it allows you to cut through a lot of the rhetoric that's out there in this debate. So the philosophy of science is defined as the principles that control science and the way it works. So as you can see, if you can think about that definition and what I just said regarding lordship, philosophy of science is that which directs people toward the lordship issue, which is what we should do in apologetics. And oh, by the way, so on Friday, I'm writing another paper. I'm writing another abstract, and so I've been trying to figure out Aristotle. I want to know what he has to do with this. He has this thing called the particulars and universals. So anyway, I was just so confused. I had read all this stuff. I'm ready to write this abstract, and so on Friday I did this. You see that? I wrote at the top, the question is, what is the question that I'm trying to answer? And I spent the whole day trying to figure that out. And you can see how far I got. This is what's missing in research today, is the ability for people to think. And that's, that is something that as apologists that we are really challenged with, because people don't know how to think anymore. In the 1800s, people could, a farmer could say to his farmhand, he could take him out in the morning and you could give him 18 things to do. And the farmhand would remember them all. And he wouldn't have to write them down, wouldn't be able to write them down. He couldn't even text him, So they were able to learn, they were able to think better, I think, back then. And I think that's one of the things that we lose in our culture, is that when people tell me something, I don't even make an effort, because I'm like, why should they can just text me, or I can email them, or I can go to, their site and see stuff. So I think that we've grown really lazy in our, in the way that we think. And I think that is another aspect of the philosophy of science, getting at the bottom of this. And I think if we're really going to be effective as apologists, that's what we've got to do. If we're going to try to figure out this problem of evolution and creation, that's what we have to do. Now, I could talk to you about a lot of things here. There's a lot of aspects in geology and biology, especially, that people like to talk about, dinosaurs and stuff. But just so you know that up front, that's my point of view here is to approach this from the philosophy of science, specifically the incomprehensibility of God doctrine, and also I'm doing a study on heuristics, and there's only one reason I'm doing that study on heuristics, and that's because it sounds so cool. Heuristics. It's spelled Heuristics. Doesn't that sound cool? I mean, that is really, it makes me sound really smart. But no, really, the study is, heuristics is so important. And the book, it's on my desk someplace, but it's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I'm very impressed with this book. It has a lot to do with, I was going to say this till later, but I'm just going to tell you, heuristics. I'm going to give you, heuristics is the study of how people develop their answers to problems. And I'll give you an example. So there was a study that they did. And they took one group of people and they put them in a room and they gave them a questionnaire and they answered hundreds of questions or 100 questions on old people. And then in the other room, they had those people answer questions on another topic. So then they walked down the hall to another room and they answered questions on something else. The whole study was about the walk down the hall. The people who had read the questions and answered the questions on old people walked slower than the people who walked down the other side of the hall. So that's just one of many studies. There's a lot of stuff. I don't know if you want me to talk about heuristics now, Gabe, or
let's do this. That sounds like an interesting topic. We could possibly bring you back on for that. But I wanted to ask you this particular question. So you mentioned, proclaiming, Christ's lordship. What are some other ways that we can best answer the evolution objective as
well, right. I think that the reason I brought up heuristics is because on my notes I had that as my question that I was addressing, and that just comes up because it's the way people think. Is we have to find out. We can't just okay. Here's an example I thought of just yesterday. Let's say that you have a leak in your house. You got water spewing all over the place, but your house is all locked up. But you have 100 plumbers standing outside your house. What good is it to have those plumbers standing outside your house if they can't get in your house? The point is that we have to find a way. If we are presenting the truth of God, but there's no delivery system, there's no key to unlock to get into the house, then people aren't going to understand it. So that's just part of the reason, that part of the answer to that question, Gabe, is we have to find a way to communicate with the culture that we're in right now. So that's all I'll say about that for right now. But I think that there's a big discussion. I mean, there's a big debate about evidence versus presuppositions, and that I've basically I don't do much in the evidence side of this, except I do go to Stone Mountain, and that's all evidential apologetics. But I got a friend of mine at church he texted me about a guy who said, hey, look at this. He's proved God through mathematics. And that is not true. You can't prove God that way. There's proof theory, and you can persuade somebody. And as apologists, we need to be careful about how we use the word prove and proof and certainty. I can prove God, and I can prove it because I can point to the Bible, because the Bible says it's true. We can't appeal to an authority above Scripture to prove God. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that we don't use the evidence like I do at Stone Mountain or this guy with mathematics, but we're not proving it. We're just providing evidence. We need to realize the limitations of that. And I think that is the reason that that's important. And the evolution to creation debate is that science is an inductive procedure. You know what it means to be inductive, right? To be inductive is, to come up with answers, but not absolute answers. There's, as scientists will do a study on on rabbits maybe, and he'll say, well, let's figure out what the best food is for rabbits. He'll do a scientific study and give them foods, and 90% of the rabbits will like this kind of food, and 20% will like the other kind of food. But so they'll choose the food that the 90% liked. Well, that's an inductive study. It wasn't 100%. So we have to be careful that science has its limitations. And so when you try to answer the question, what is the best way to answer evolution, we have to have that at the front of our minds, that when we present evidence, we need to do it like I do at Stone Mountain. Gabe and I were talking about that before we got on, and I always say stuff like, what we think is that Stone Mountain happened about 4,000 years ago, and this is the evidence for it. And at Stone Mountain, they have stuff all over the place. But I was, and generally, posted at the very top of the mountain, they used to have this big display about how it was formed 58 million years ago or something like that. But on the train ride around the mountain once, I was really happy because the person on the train ride said, scientists think that Stone Mountain was formed, millions of years ago. I'm like, that's fantastic that they said that. That, in other words, they didn't state it as a blanket fact. When you hear something on, a video, or hear something about evolution, just keep your eyes out for that, or your ears open for that phraseology. That when people say that when they say that evolution proves this, or they speak in authoritative language like that, because it's not. You can't prove something like that. Absolutely. So this was a big challenge in philosophy, and Descartes, he was a mathematician, and he said, well, we need to reach toward indubitability. He thought you could find indubitability through mathematics. Indubitability is just another word for certainty. And at the end of the day, he was a rationalist. The rationalists ended up in subjectivism and skepticism. So it doesn't work. You can't reach indubitability, but you can provide evidence for God, and but that's not proved to the extent that it needs to be. But the other two things, well, first, another thing that you need to do to answer this question is you need to realize that it's discussion where a lot of emotion can be involved. A lot. People can get real angry about this. I've been at Fernbank before, and people will hear what I'm saying and just get, really angry with me. Same is true at Stone Mountain. But more often than not, people will just start listening in, especially at Stone Mountain, because I've got a really low voice. I always envy these people with these deep voices. But so I use a voice amplifier. So these people will stop and they'll listen to me and stuff. And more often than not, people are willing to listen. But we need to not get caught up in the emotion of this issue. And the way we do that is Colossians verse 4, verses 5 and 6. It's very important in apologetics, not just for this issue, but it is especially with this issue. It says, walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer each person. So I used to have that verse memorized, but I got an ESV Bible, and it's the word anyway. So that the point is there, that wisdom. We need to approach this problem with wisdom. We need to be prudent about how we answer questions, and we need to make the best use of our time. Gabe had asked me a couple of days ago. He wanted me to comment on the flat Earth, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. I don't think that that's the best use of our time. Maybe it is important, but I haven't spent time with it. I just don't think it's the best use of our time. I think we need to realize the urgency of presenting the truth where it's needed, and I don't think that's an area. And another thing is that our what we say needs to be seasoned with salt. I went to a debate in 2002. There were two guys up there, and one of the guys had a much better argument than the other guy, but he was a jerk. He was up there, and we in the line before the debate, we were all talking about, oh, I like this guy or that guy. Well, just because the guy who had the better argument was so obnoxious, afterward, most of the people who were on the fence were like, oh, I'm going to believe the other guy who was so pensive over there. So that's an important part of what we do. We have to be careful to, the best way to answer evolution is to do it seasoned with salt, because there are a lot of things in the evolution creation debate that are touchy issues, because you're dealing with a lordship issue here if you want to boil everything down. And of course, Proverbs 26, which you guys know, I'm sure, it says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. So, we need to be prepared to have answers. And when we don't have answers, we need to know where to point them. And but there are many times when you just have to be silent. I think that in apologetics, and I've learned this through, all of these years with creation apologetics, that one of the most underutilized aspects of debating, of apologetics, is silence. And it's effective. And I think sometimes it just doesn't make sense to, I used in between 2000 and 2010, it was a different world back then, because email was a big thing. So I used to debate people on email, and I learned quickly that it was kind of fruitless to get into these long email discussions. And sometimes, the more brevity you exercise, the briefer it was, the more effective your response was. There are 100 things that you need to say, but if you can learn to be concise and to be attentive to what the Holy Spirit wants you to say in these situations, then it can be that. That is another answer to what's the best way. Another thing. So my wife asked me yesterday, she had seen something. I don't know where she got it. Somebody had asked her. She said, well, I have a friend, this guy's a scientist. He's like, how could a good God allow for this bad thing to happen? And so, that's another topic for you guys to deal with someday. Probably that's important. But, one of the things that's important in the evolution creation debate is we do not want to answer these questions on origins on their terms. We need to answer it on biblical terms. We need to say, in order to answer that question, we have to say, well, God is the ultimate authority, and God is the one who allows us the answers to these things. Greg Bonson uses this example. He said that it's like having a child sit on his father's lap and slap him. The child can't slap him unless he was sitting on his father's lap. So why should we complain about a God who apparently bad things happened when we're having to? God is the one that gave us life to begin with. He gave us the however many years that we have. We need to it's all about perspective. And so another thing, to answer the question of what's the best way to answer. And I wrote this in the very first thing I published in the year 2000. It's that it's not about winning an argument. I would rather lose an argument but present the biblical truth accurately than win an argument and not present the truth at all. The word of God is perfect, converting the soul. So I think that we need to keep that in mind when we are addressing this problem of creation and evolution. So we need to start with the Bible in all that we do. We are defending an objective truth. the objective truth of Scripture, the objective truth of a 6-day creation is uh, the truth that we are defending. We cannot allow this debate to become a subjective debate. We can't say, well, this is my opinion and that's your opinion. And there are times when Christians can just agree to disagree. I know all that, but we have to be careful not to surrender the objective truth of Scripture. John MacArthur's book is Battle for the Beginning. Great book. It's a real, in that book he writes, he said, we have surrendered without cause. We have surrendered without cause. And I think that that's a really good way of thinking about it, because I think that a lot of times when it comes to an issue of science, we're crumpled and we surrender. But we have to understand that science, see, this is the crux of the debate, and it's with science. And science cannot be self-defining. We cannot allow it to be self-defining. It cannot define itself. And that's what happens with the creation research that I'm doing. A lot of times people, without knowing it, they allow science to become self-defining. And so it can also be self-authoritative. The scientists will make an assertion, and what's the authority behind that? Well, science is. It's circular reasoning, and that's one of the things that we need to realize. And that's a hard message to get through to even Christians. Science is a subordinate discipline. But there are many definitions for the word science, and so I wrote a definition of my own in a paper I wrote, and even my editor said, no, that's too Christian. Basically, my definition was, science is a metaphysical and epistemological tool to help us to help us defend Scripture. That's not what it is. Well, I wrote down because I knew I'd forget it. Science is a methodological and epistemological tool to help see the invisible attributes of God, his divine nature and eternal power, which are seen in creation. That's the reason that we have science. Science is an amazing tool. I'm not saying that I dismiss science, but I'm saying that science cannot claim an authority above God. And I think that that's where most people don't understand.
So let me ask you this last question before we get into our dialogue. And Tom, I just want to say thank you for everything. It's been rich. So the last question that I want to ask you before we get into our dialogue session is, why is this topic important for the believer? It seems as if it's just a question that comes up in the academic realm, where it's just, hey, my kids, they go to school and they might hear about the Big Bang Theory, but once they grow out of it, just read scriptures. Why is this even a relevant topic for the Christians? So I just, we would just like to ask you that question before we get into the dialogue.
Okay, the reason it's important is because it's a lordship issue, that it's an authority issue. We cannot surrender the authority in history and science and theology even we cannot surrender authority in history to science, and that's what's happened a lot of times. Okay, I want to say 4 things. There are 4 questions that we need to ask when we consider the origins issue. Number 1, we need to ask scientific questions, but we need to realize the limitations for science when it comes to, Stone Mountain. There's only so much. All we're doing at Stone Mountain is forensic science. We are like a detective. walking into a room where a crime has been committed. We weren't there. All we can do is use our science to forensically come up with conclusions. But there are three questions that are equally important. One of them is philosophical. We have to understand what it is that drives philosophy. We can think of philosophy in two ways. Philosophy helps you decide what your view of reality is and what your view of knowledge is. So when we look at questions of origin, we have to consider that. The third question we need to ask when we're considering origins is the question of history. So a lot of, I'm working on another paper down the road on historiography. There was a paper written in 2000, a great paper, but it needs to be revised. Hopefully I'm going to publish that. But basically, historiography is the study of how we understand history. And we cannot allow science to be the authority in history, because see, that's why we have museums called natural history museums that don't deal at all with history. They're just science. So we need to be clear about our terms there and understand that those are four questions. But the fourth question, I've only given you three. The fourth and the most important question that we need to ask is theology. Where does theology is our theological questions are those questions that govern everything else. And they are what we should when we answer the question of creation and evolution, there are four doctrines that we are dealing with. First is the doctrine of creation, obviously, but also is the doctrine of providence. And thirdly is the doctrine of the aseity of God, God's self-evidence, self-existence, God's self-existence. And the fourth doctrine is the doctrine of God's incomprehensibility. That's what I'm writing on right now. So we have to understand that there are theological issues involved, and so if those are issues that are not clear on the surface with the evolution creation debate, but they are embedded in what we're dealing with when we are talking about creation and evolution. So I've lost the video for everybody but me, so I'll just keep talking about this stuff.
So you said you lost video of you?
No, so yeah, you're the picture of you just came off the screen, but the point is that if you allow me, I just want to talk real briefly about the doctrine of the incomprehensibility of God, because that is a doctrine that is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this is something that really is at the heart of the evolution and creation debate. Is when people come to this issue, they immediately, I think the tendency is to say, okay, well, how can we reconcile science with God? And so we have to understand the limitations of human reason. And we also have to understand that God does not have any limitations in his comprehensibility. He can comprehend everything. So what happens in this debate with all intellectual debates is, for the unbeliever, he has an irrational thinking and an irrational thinking. His rational thinking is this. He says, well, look, I can reason things. I can figure things out. With human reason, we've done amazing things, especially in science. But he will admit that he has limits, that he doesn't know everything. So the unbeliever says, well, there's an ideal of complete comprehension, that if we just had enough time and money, the human reason could figure this thing out. And that kind of reasoning is self-defeating. How can you say you have limits on your reasoning when you don't have limits on your reasoning? If you say, well, I can figure everything out, well, but you just said that you have your reasoning is limited. That is at the core of the evolution thinking, because with evolution, the thought is if we just had more time, or if you just added more time, we could have more mutations, and then we could figure evolution out. The ironic thing about that logic is that the more time, the more mutations, the worse off you are, because you've got more mutations. You've got something that is more mutated. Mutations are always bad things. Very rarely are they good things. In fact, when they are good things, for example, sickle cell anemia. With sickle cell anemia, some people are resistant to sickle cell anemia. You know why? Because they've had malaria, or they have, I can't remember exactly. I think maybe they have a resistance to malaria, but because of this resistance to malaria, or that they've had malaria, they are they can't get sickle cell anemia. So that's a mutation, yes, but it's not helped them because they have this problem with malaria. So when people say that there are beneficial mutations, it's a very there's a lot of problems with that. So anyway, so getting back to the doctrine of the incomprehensibility of God. So the the non-Christian has real problems with incomprehensibility. He has an irrational belief that is not supported by his rational belief. They don't mix. They're in opposite directions. The Christian, on the other hand, the Christian also has a rational belief. The Christian says, well, look, I can figure things out, but I know that I'm limited. I'm created in the image of God, and my ability to figure things out is limited, but I have a God who is not limited, who comprehends everything. And so therefore I can't have everything. So I have an irrational point of view too. So there are things I don't know. So just in case you're taking notes, there's the irrational side is actually the transcendental side. The rational side is the not immutable, but there are technical terms for this. But I have a square of opposition I can show, or I'll put on my website. But the point is that for the Christian, the fact that he is irrational and saying I don't have all the answers makes completely all the sense, because he says I'm rational in the fact that my God has all the answers. So it makes sense for the Christian. And that's what I'm going to be writing on. Maybe I shouldn't have brought such a complex topic up at this point, but I hope that you guys see what I'm saying in that, because
Yeah.
so
Hey Tom, I just want to say thank you for your words. Man, that was rich. It was powerful. I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate your time coming on. Thank you. I speak for James, Kwame, and Tony. Thank you for that rich information. I shared your website in the chat, and your website will also be shared in the description link of the YouTube video. So, for those that are listening, if there's anything else that you would like to know about Tom, that information will be placed in the description. And Tom, thank you again. And
you're
so,
welcome.
yeah. So for people who follow us, we know that it's time for the dialogue time of our event, where this is where When you listen in and you have questions, you have comments, you have statements, now's the time to get it out. If there's anybody that had any questions on the topic or any questions for Tom, James, did you have anything?
Yeah, I just first want to thank Tom. Thank you so much for, just breaking certain ideas down, especially the certainty issue. And I know you had mentioned heuristics and how they impact how people make decisions. And I did a brief little study on heuristics, but I think I don't want to confuse. Um, I don't know if that's, I don't know. To bring heuristics up may confuse more than uh, give actual assistance at this point. But um, one question I wanted to bring to the table is, you mentioned about the differences between creationism and evolution coming down to certainty, basically. And um, I guess my question would be, have you found that have you found Christians, people that proclaim to be Christians, um, actually still take on the evolution theory? I mean, or adopt the evolution theory. And when you're talking with them, how do they reconcile? What are the questions? In other words, if you were talking to a theistic evolutionist, what questions would you have for them as to how they uh how they come to their conclusions? I mean, I guess the first question would be, how did you come to this conclusion? But they're basically marrying the evolution theory with creation. Um, can you make more clear of what a theistic evolutionist is and how to speak with them, or what are the dangers, or how you would actually talk with them?
That's a good question. I'm glad you asked it, and I'm glad you asked it the way you did. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, theistic evolution is a challenge. Is There's a lot to say about it because there's not just theistic evolution. There are Christians who have adopted evolution in different ways. There's something called progressive creation, which is not evolution, but it accommodates evolution in a lot of ways. There's something called the gap theory. When I was writing my articles, I got more people opposed to me by that gap theory article than I did anything else. There's something called the day age theory, which is really the same as progressive creation, and it's different in minor ways. And then there's framework hypothesis and other things. So, but your question is, what would you do? How would you ask somebody that question? And my I firmly believe that you're wasting your time to try to find.
Oh, you're breaking up a little bit. Good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're having technical difficulties. Tom, are you there?
how how they make their evidence, because I am. Can you hear me? How about
Yeah,
now?
yeah. You're good now. Go ahead.
So with the theistic evolutionist, you would ask them the questions that I had brought up previously. You would say you would you would force the debate into a lordship issue. You would say, where is it that you get that thinking from? Is it science? And then I think this is just so important. The real tool, as an apologist in this, is to say, where does science fit in God's plan? If we look at science as a subordinate thing, then we really have a powerful apologetic against the theistic evolutionist thinking. I think that is a key to that question, whether it's theistic evolutionist, progressive creationist, or whatever, that we need to challenge them and say, look, to what extent does science have its authority? Um, is science, and one of the things I would bring out is that science is not an independent reality. It is not an independent judge. Science is subordinate. It gains its power from the Christian worldview. In fact, I was writing a paper recently, and I made that point that science is a child of Christianity. So I went to, I went to reference that, and I came up with about 15 different references. Historically, you see science growing out of the Christian worldview, and that is undeniable. So I think what I would do with the theistic evolutionist is push that point. As an apologist, our job is to defend. What are we defending? We're defending the hope that's in us. And so what is that hope that's in us? That hope that's in us is not about our particular subjective point of view of how old the earth is. Our hope that's in us is about the lordship of Christ, essentially. I think that is where we need to push the debate. And you do that in a number of different ways. Challenging him. Generally, someone like that's going to immediately come up with an argument from science. And so that's where you need to be. I mean, there's so many arguments out there that I think that you need to say, okay, if your argument from science accommodates the fact that science is subordinate to Christ, then I have something to deal with, but they can't. There's no way for a theistic evolutionist. Theistic evolution is something you really I don't have many people ascribe to that so much as progressive creation, for example. That makes sense?
Yeah. I have one more follow-up question with that, though, because I noticed that people who try to marry the theory of evolution and the creation narrative together, for some reason, there is a attraction to the free will argument. So my question is, do you find yourself, especially with the lordship type of approach, do you find yourself having to help them understand what free will is, or are you dealing with somewhat of a theology that's, when it comes to their salvation, how they believe they're saved? Do you run into a lot of these people that consider that they're basically okay, they're basically good people, therefore, they kind of champion their free will in a way that kind of almost, sometimes I would say, takes away a little bit of God's glory in a sense. Their salvation is kind of based on something they did as well, because they're not so bad. So I kind of ramble a little bit there, but my laser focused question is, do you find yourself, with the lordship approach, dealing with these people that marry the two together, do you deal with that free will conversation? Does that come up often?
That's a great question. That's a really insightful question. I'm not out there like I was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I went to many different churches, all kinds of denominations. And generally, this happened to me once, and it really bothered me. Somebody said, "Oh yeah, I agree. I believe that the earth is, young earth. I believe in the young earth thing." And I'm like, well, good for you. I'm like, that's not what I'm teaching here. It's not a subjective opinion, but I think that we live in a culture, and I would have talked more about this if I had talked fully about heuristics. We live in a culture where our heuristics is that of opinions. And so the person who believes that his salvation is dependent on his free will is also if he's going to approach science, what's he going to do, James? You know, he's going to say, well, I'm the authority here. I'm the one, my reasoning is the one who's going to get me here. And not if I know I don't have all the reasoning here, but so I'm going to turn to somebody, the experts, appeal to an expert, the scientist. And so they're not going to make their ultimate appeal to scripture. They're going to make it to, to their own human reason. And I think that's an inevitable. I've been in churches before, and I preach, and the people afterwards, they're just like, oh yeah, it's fantastic. And I'm like, I don't feel good about this at all, because they're just accepting what I'm saying based on their own, the fact that, okay, I had an E on my hat and now I can put a C on my hat. Now I'm a creationist. So that's disturbing to me, to see that people think that they can get to the problem of this question by their own human reason. And essentially that's what's happening with the free will thing, that they rely on their own self and their own thinking to draw that conclusion.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, heuristics. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. First, I want to say, man, I applaud you for even taking on this type of a topic. This is such a wide conversation. What you touched on in the past 45 minutes or so is probably like decades worth of study and just learning and conversation, because none of these has a definitive answer. None of it. Right? There's none of this you can point to something and say this is the proof. And I love your statement around lordship, because ultimately that's where this falls. This falls on, do you have the faith to believe that the word is the word, and what it tells you is to be the truth? So I probably would love to sit down, and I could probably just pick your brain with thousands of questions with some of the stuff that you're talking about here, because I'd love to learn more and hear more about this and understand some of the study that you've done to put into this type of a conversation. But here's something that comes to mind, and this is just kind of the first thing that comes to mind when I have this, and you've spoken to this a little bit, but I'd like maybe some examples, right? Because I find that and so I'm a devotional Christian. I think maybe that's first I should state that, right? I'm the Christian that believes that the heart, above all things, is what's happening. I'm renewed every day. These are where I live. This is where my exposure to God becomes most prevalent. I encounter him in quiet times, in moments where I pray, not just for myself, but for my family, my kids, my wife, and I encounter that through the word. I pray the word out. These things all come to me in this type of a revelation. But in this conversation, this is, in your words, I'd say it's far more objective. And so how do you reconcile? How do you reconcile scientific discoveries, right? I can give you a litany of scientific discoveries and things that you can physically point to, that just seem to contradict the biblical account of creation. And how do we address this tension between faith and reason? And you've touched on this a bit, and you mentioned lordship, and I get that part, but there's such a wide conversation to that, and I think you've probably had that conversation 1,000 times. But I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on that, specifically around that piece.
Well, that question is, I could talk for 12 hours and still not get to the end of it, because, but I think that there are general apologetic tools that we can use to answer these questions. We can't answer every specific scientific assertion that Neil deGrasse Tyson brings up, or whoever else that is that's out there, or who is on PBS or whatever it is you're watching, or videos and things. It's impossible. But if you learn to think That's why I went into the philosophy of science, because I began to see that there were so many people in creation science who just wanted to counteract a particular scientific discovery with a scientific assertion on the other end. And what you're doing there is that's answering a fool according to his folly, and you're being just like him. We need to be careful not to answer these questions on their terms. We need to bring God into the debate from the beginning. Science can only be defined by acknowledging God. Now, you're saying, so people, probably not you guys, but people might say, well, then how does science make all these discoveries if they've rejected God? And it's because they've borrowed the intellectual capital from God. Science is a child of God. The reason that we have these discoveries, especially these technological discoveries, is because they are built on scientific principles that are, the principle of uniformity, the principle, all these scientific laws that were established and recognized by 16th and 17th century scientists. We're still using those. And that's where I think that if we try to respond to specific discoveries, and it's really hard because it's a matter of heuristics a lot of times, because it's hard to decide when your mind is trained to be attracted to people who are so scientific sounding when they say stuff, and then it's hard to understand what the real response is. But the answer to these questions is we have to go back to the Bible. We have to look at Colossians 4. We have to say we have to approach these with not just knowledge, we have to approach them with wisdom. So then you ask the question also, you really, that was hard. Faith and reason. Oh, that's a topic that, in all these books I have right here, probably if you took every section of every book that dealt with this question of faith and reason, I'd probably have a stack that went to the top of the room. The difference between faith and reason is basic. That's why I really like this paper I'm doing right now on the incomprehensibility of God, because it puts that in perspective so well, because it shows you that it's only by a God who is incomprehensible that we have any ability to reason at all. We are the derivative, and it is our job in science just to try to understand what God is saying. God has already given us an interpretation. It gets down in science. A lot of the things that happen in the Creation Research Society, which I'm involved with, or deal with facts. So it has to do with the philosophy of fact. What is it where did that fact come from? If that fact is just out there for us to use our human brain to give it meaning, then we aren't going to come to an answer about it. But if we acknowledge God in that, then we will have a philosophy of fact that works. Now, evolution, a non-Christian. So I'm going to answer this with a little analogy. The Pharisees, the Phoenicians, Solomon hired the Phoenicians to build the temple. Okay. And the Phoenicians were not the covenant people. Okay. But he hired them. He had the blueprints, and he gave them, he said, okay, you need so many timbers this length and so many kind of things this length and stuff. And so the Phoenicians, who were not God's people, were able to build this magnificent temple for Solomon. So the analogy there is that the Phoenicians are like unbelievers. They had the ability to build magnificent things with science, but they are doing it. If God were not the architect, if God, you know, do you think that all this digital technology came as a surprise to God? God knew all this before we knew it. This didn't come out of the mind of man. Man is able to derive his ability to do things from God. It's like the Phoenicians when they built the temple, they were building it based on the blueprint provided to them by God, and God provides the blueprint for everything to make sense in our culture and in our science. And he, you know, he gave them the ability to know how to put them together, just like he gives the scientist the ability to know how to do his work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm tracking. I'm following your line of thought. It's and I'm going to oversimplify it, and it's really doesn't. It's not fair to oversimplify it. But what it comes across as is that it's really speaking to this incomprehensible master who is, you know, for all intents and purposes, is saying, you know, you may have the ability, you may have the right, you may have the free will. I am still in control. I am still here. And for us, our thought to try to figure that out through science or through conversation or through dialogue or through books or through what we can find is kind of like what you said before. It's almost like folly. It's like, what are you striving for? There is not a point where our understanding reaches his understanding. And I think this is you know, again, it leads into so many different questions, right? It leads into so many, and I'll follow up with this one piece here. For the non-Christian, right? For the non-Christian, and I think you will get you. I heard you start to go down this path, or for someone who's looking for that light, or someone who's, you know, we think of the concept of salt of the earth and light of the world. Does this conversation, or could this conversation create friction to someone looking to become a believer, or someone who is in a position to become a believer, because of the, I don't want to say complexity, but what I'll say is the friction between this reasoning and this type of topic? Could someone look at this and say, it doesn't make sense?
Absolutely. And it's not going to make sense ultimately unless the Spirit of God changes their reasoning. That is something that requires us as apologists to be very prudent in how we talk to people. There are some times, you know, I was talking to a guy about 6 months ago, and I just realized, I reached a point with him where I was like, there's no use in talking to him anymore, because he's not listening. I could tell when I was talking to him, his eyes were glazed over because he was thinking about the next thing he was going to say. So that would have been answering the fool according to his folly, and I would be just like him. So, but there are times when, you know, I think that, remember, think about this. Proverbs 26:4 says, it says, answer a fool according to his folly, so that he might not be wise in his own eyes. It didn't say so that he might not know in his own. It's this issue of wisdom. So we're not dealing with knowledge per se. We're dealing with wisdom. We're talking about a spiritual activity that's going on. We're not just talking about raw knowledge or brute facts. We're talking about wisdom. And that's why I think that at the big, you know, as an apologist, we need to keep Colossians 4 verse 5 in front of us. You know, with wisdom, I even wrote it down but you know, we need to walk in wisdom toward outsiders. It doesn't say walk in with all this knowledge, you know, with all these books. It says walk in wisdom So yeah, it can be offensive. Hopefully it is offensive, because we need to push the antithesis. And I hate saying that. I don't, because that sounds mean, but we need to push the antithesis in the sense that we need to force somebody. The debate has to get back to that lordship issue. We need to push it, and we need to say, okay, what we need that has to be our goal as an apologist, to get to the lordship question. So we need to push the antithesis. And yes, if somebody is really listening to us and debating us, there's a spiritual warfare that's going on inside of them, and they will probably be they could very well be angry. In fact, I hate it when people just say something like, you're talking to somebody and they agree with everything that you say, and then you ask them a question and they're like, you realize they don't know anything. So I would much rather have somebody think something out and get angry with me than and try to respond to them.
Thank you for that, Anthony. Thank you for that, Tony. Not Tony. Tom. Kwame. Kwame said he wanted to say something. Kwame, are you there? Or are you ready for your question? Because I actually.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
All right, Kwame, go ahead.
I appreciate that. My question, in light of everything that's been said, is, and James and I, we had a short discussion Friday, I believe. And while you were talking, while you were saying what you're saying, it comes to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Genesis 3 comes to my mind. For God knows that when you do eat of this fruit, you will be like gods, right? Like God, knowing good and evil. And also Genesis chapter 11 with the building of the Tower of Babel. Let us make a name for ourselves. Do you see something with that going on, in the sense of, it's like there's this, we want to make a name, those who hold to evolutionary theory as a fact, even those who hold to, do you see it being unavoidable to come to that place where that person will see themselves as, well, man being the measure of all things, in a sense, and or we're being, if the person holds to a creation evolutionary theory, that they see themselves as progressing to be the best of which, quote unquote, God would have them to be. And that there's like this, it seems to be that it's unavoidable that it will end up in a, God is somewhere over there out of sight, yet we are the ones that is in view as the measure. Am I making sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great question. And I'm so glad you brought up Genesis 3. That is, in order to understand the incomprehensibility of God doctrine, you have to start with Genesis chapter 3. When Adam and Eve fell, they were given the choice. They want, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was that knowledge that they wanted. And then you're right. I'm glad you brought up Genesis 11 too, in the Tower of Babel. Is that where the Tower of Babel is at? Yeah, Tower of Babel there. I think that's an important thing that we need to keep in perspective, that people will, if they are suppressing the truth of God in their unrighteousness, their intellect can very easily try to take over and say, I've got this thing figured out. I've got a way to suppress the truth of God in unrighteousness and accept God and accept evolution, and I can get along with everybody. And that's one of the things that is another heuristic concern, because Aristotle, his philosophy was built around the golden mean. Everybody had this regression to the mean. that everybody wanted to agree on something. And that's where we are today. Everybody wants to agree on things. And so it's much easier as a cognitive exercise to agree with somebody than it is to try to figure out the essence of the problem. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So
Cool beans, cool beans. Thank you for that, KD. Thank you for that, Anthony, James. Anyone else had any questions on this particular topic? So, Tom, I have a question. So, what would you do to encourage a believer who might see this as an intimidating topic to take on concerning evolution? We had an event earlier this year talking about answering atheism, and I asked my friend who came on as well, what do you say to the Christian that's intimidated of the atheist? And so I want to ask you the same question. Like, what would you say to the Christian that you know, they barely they have enough knowledge of the faith, and they find themselves in a situation where they're talking to an atheist or somebody who's a theistic evolutionist. Like, what do you say to the person who might see this as an intimidating topic, and what encouragement could you give that Christian as far as attempting and answering these topics?
well, if somebody were to say that to me, the first thing I would do is hug them. I really would. I'd say, this is fantastic. I love you asking that. I'm glad that you're intimidated, because you know what? Most people, most Christians are not going to use that word that starts with an I as a response to all this information. They will use another word, ignore. I would much rather for someone to be intimidated than to ignore it. But to answer that question, I would first of all encourage the person overwhelmingly, because there's so much to know about this topic. I mean, I've spent hours, and my wife, I'm down here reading and studying stuff, and I come up and my wife's like, so what did you do all day? I didn't do anything. So, but this book right here is probably the best book that you could give somebody like that. I don't know if you can read it. It's called
Ultimate Proof by Jason Lau.
Yes, I think the guy Daniel Allgood,
right.
I think he recommended this.
He recommended it as well. Yes, sir.
The thing about this book is that it allows you to address complicated scientific problems, but allows you to address them with basic principles rather than thinking that you have to have all the answers to that particular question. And there's tremendous resources out there. To tell them to email me. I've got, go to my website, and I'll help them. And there are a lot of people who it is intimidating. Let's face it. I was watching something the other day and I was intimidated. But another thing that's important to understand in that regard is that we are overwhelmingly overpowered money-wise in this issue. Most of the people in the Creation Research Society who've published, right next to me, I've got 7 shelves worth of journals from the year 2000. These are written by people who aren't getting money for this. So it's hard to have to produce programs with the kind of question and power that Neil deGrasse Tyson or any of these other people do. So it's easy to be intimidated. I would just advise that person, don't give up. Contact people like me.
All right, cool. So other than that book, and is there any other sources that you can recommend anyone
Yeah.
that's listening?
What I'll do is I'll put a list on my website.
Cool
Maybe
bean.
this is a good book, John MacArthur's book, The Battle for the Beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Another book, I was just going through my bookshelf this afternoon. Another book by cut it out. Oh, here it is. It's Evolution's Achilles Heel. This is
You
put
told
out
me
by,
about that one. Yeah.
yeah, this is by Rob Carter, was the editor. He has a section in there. Very good book. Another one for a book on progressive creation. This is the classic, Refuting Compromise. I think there's another more current edition of this, but
Uh-oh, you're breaking up again. Tom, you're breaking up again.
by a guy named Jonathan Sarfati. Guy, he's so smart. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so he was one of these guys that could play chess with 10 different people. Another good book is this one, Creation and Change. This is by Douglas Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
So let's do
yeah,
this. James just informed me that he had another question that he wanted to pose to you before he stepped off. It's getting late. He had to leave, but he's back
okay.
on. He want to ask you a question. So
Okay.
just hold up on that, James.
Hey, yeah, I mean, well, it's not so much a question. It's just my kind of final statements before I log off here. But I do appreciate just all the content, especially the resources. 'Cause I think that's the main thing we need is just more resources to truly read and take some time alone to dive in, and then we can have a more informed conscience on things. But I will say, going back to the lordship issue, I just had a thought about how important it is, and because there's black and white answers to scientific discovery. We could talk about how much scientists are really struggling just to recreate a single cell, and how they are breaking their necks to even just try to get stage one done. And they've been telling us, all the journals and everything are telling us that they make so many discoveries. Yet, when you really dig into the details of what they're really doing, they're still borrowing matter and borrowing things in order to make their assembly look like it's out of thin air, and unfortunately, the public gets sold another narrative. But I love how you're like going past that. You're like, look, I can give you the answers, but is it really going to be that effective? And I think ultimately, what I learned tonight is that it's bigger than just having a surefire answer. I think ultimately it's about the heart of people and the issues of their heart that are the main cause of their disagreement or their disgruntledness or whatever they may bring to the table. But I say this last thing about lordship. Just for anyone looking or watching, Jesus will not be Savior where he's not Lord. And
Amen.
the fruit of that is, if a person is doing their best, yet they're still considering themselves first, the Lord of their life, like the person that has to make the final decision, or the person that has to make the final answer or get the last word in, right? That's what that person is, who we need to pray for them to, Lord, please reveal yourself as the Lord to them. Because we love having heroes and saviors, but we always want to take that place of the final authority in our life. And I just think that our witness to people ultimately comes down to that. I'm so thankful for Tom for bringing us to bear on that, because I think a lot of people may be like, I want to know how to win these arguments. These people are talking about cells and organisms, and microbiology and all this stuff. And I think that I think you hit the nail on the head. You really redirected my attention back to what's really at play here when we're having conversations with these people. So I just want to commend you, Tom, for coming on, and that lordship conversation is so important. So is Jesus your Lord? Because it seems like something else might be. So I think that's a good thing. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. It really does.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate
that's one of the reasons I'm kind of I kind of don't like the whole issue of the Christian worldview thing, because people, that means so many different things to different people. I came up with the word lordship because I started looking at my notes and I'm thinking, well, what is the bottom of this? And it always ends up with lordship. So, so I think, yeah, I'm so glad that you were able to see that.
Yeah,
I was able to communicating.
Awesome.
Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Thank you for that, James. Anyone else before we wrap things up? All right. Well, hey, Tom, is there anything you would like to say before wrapping things up? Because I think people, it is a little early, but I think people got kids that they got to prepare for school and whatnot. So it's getting a little late. Tom, anything last words? Like I said, I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for your friendship. Any last things?
Well, thank you for your friendship. We've I enjoy talking to you, Gabe, seeing that smiling face. And you taught me how to do a fist pump. Before I met Gabe, I didn't know how to do a fist pump. So I'm like the biggest nerd there is, but yeah, I think I just want to encourage you guys to keep up the good work. It was so good to hear James say what he said, because sometimes I just don't think people get it. I think that lordship is just the center of this issue, and so I've listened to hundreds of people over the last 20 years, and I just got to a point where I was like, well, we can only talk so much about dinosaurs and geology and the Grand Canyon. There has to be a deeper, more effective apologetic. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And if you live in the Atlanta area in April, I am going to do this trip, and I do have the site creationdefense.com. I'm going to start actually trying to use it, and I got a guy at church who's helping me with it. And so if there's anybody who has questions, please let me know. I'll be happy to spend however much time on that you want.
Cool beans. And like I said,